We've been looking at deprivation of citizenship orders for about a year now, and this is a secretive power. It's very little known, which is under the British Nationality Act, and it allows the Home Secretary to revoke the British citizenship of anybody as long as it doesn't make them stateless. And the largest number of cases that we found previously in a single year was 6. And what we found out is that between January and November 2013, she used the power 20 times, which is a real escalation in the power. And the suggestion is that part of the reason behind this really steep rise is that she's using it to try and prevent British fighters who are overseas in Syria from returning home.
Why do they think Syria is a different case, say, to, I don't know, Afghanistan in 2001 or other conflicts?
We have previously seen the power used against individuals who are alleged to have gone to Afghanistan or to Somalia to join militant groups. There is obviously a large amount of concern at the moment over the number of Brits who are reported to have gone to Syria to fight. I mean, we had a Foreign Office source tell us that the number could be anything between 40 and 240 individuals. Obviously, Syria is geographically much closer to the UK than Afghanistan or Somalia or any of these other battlefields, and there is real concern that there are a number of individuals who are becoming radicalised, going over to Syria, and then the risk is that they will return home still with those sort of jihadi intentions.
Of those, that sort of cohort of people who have gone to somewhere like Syria to fight, how many of those are dual nationalities? Because my immediate reaction would be to imagine that most of them are solid British people with one passport, and therefore you can't strip them of their nationality. It's
very, very hard to say. I mean, certainly from what we've seen from individuals who've lost their citizenship who've gone to Somalia, it's not necessarily Somali, people from the Somali diaspora who have gone to Somalia to fight. So, for example, 2 of the individuals who we found who lost their citizenship and were later killed in drone strikes, one of those individuals was his parents were Egyptian, and another individual, his parents were Lebanese. So, it's not necessarily that there are Syrian Brits, but there are, young British Muslims who are in danger of becoming radicalised, is the argument, that they are in danger of becoming radicalised. And obviously, many British Muslims, even when they're born here, their parents may be from elsewhere.
But if they only have one passport, then that means that they can't be stripped of their citizenship, right?
That's right. That's the current limitation of the power. The Home Secretary can't use the power if it's going to make anybody stateless. There is, one line of concern which says that this actually leads to quite a discriminatory effect in how these powers can be used. Because, for example, if someone's parents are from India, India doesn't allow dual citizenship. So if you become a British citizen, you lose your Indian citizenship. Whereas someone who's from Pakistan, his parents might be Pakistani, so he might be entitled, or he or she might be entitled to both Pakistani and British citizenship. Citizenship is a really hard to pin down concept as well. It's not as though you necessarily have a certificate which says, I am a British citizen, or I am a Pakistani citizen, or I am a Lebanese citizen. Not everybody who is a citizen of a country will hold a passport for a country. So establishing whether or not someone is a dual national or not can be really tricky. And there have been a number of cases where people have claimed that the orders have left them stateless. And this has led to huge, long legal discussions and legal examinations of the constitutions of these different countries to try and establish whether or not someone is in fact a dual citizen. So it's not always perfectly clear-cut whether or not someone could fall under deprivation of citizenship.
That's fascinating, isn't it? So if, for example, you have the right to be a dual citizen, that sort of counts, is it?
Well, this is what we've seen. I mean, Mohammed Saka, who was a British-born man, he was born in London. His parents had moved here from Egypt 35 years ago. He lost his British citizenship under these powers in 2010. He was later killed in a US drone strike at the beginning of last year. Now, his parents have argued that he wasn't an Egyptian citizen, that they were Egyptian, but he had a British passport, he'd grown up in Britain, he considered himself British. So it was a real shock to them when they found out that a young Egyptian commander who'd been reported killed was in fact their son. And they've said that they blame they hold the British government responsible for his death because they believe that, the loss of his British citizenship left him vulnerable. But they've also argued that he was never an Egyptian citizen in the first place, but those were the grounds on which he lost his citizenship. These are very complex areas, very difficult to establish areas, but the effects can be really, really grave.
And I see in the Independent report that the Home Office is exploring ways to expand its citizenship stripping
Absolutely.
powers.
The Home Office is currently exploring whether it can, in fact, make people stateless by using these orders, and that would represent a huge expansion of its ability to strip people of their citizenship. Now, according to reports and parliamentary briefings that we've seen, the indication is that what they're considering doing is developing a power where if someone has acquired British citizenship, if they've come to the UK and acquired British citizenship, whether the Home Secretary can give herself the right to remove their citizenship if they're found to have done something really serious, really prejudicial to the vital interests of the country. And this would be a huge expansion of the Home Secretary's powers. It's not clear yet whether this is going to go ahead, and the UK is a signatory to international treaties on the prevention of statelessness. Statelessness is it sounds like a bureaucratic matter, but it's actually very far-reaching and very serious. It involves an individual actually having no legal right to live or to work or to exist in any particular country. It makes people enormously vulnerable. But it's a sign of how much the government has come to use this power, that they're planning on expanding it, or they're exploring ways in which they can expand it.
Where can a stateless person actually be?
Well, I mean, this is one of the questions, and one of the barriers that some people have suggested would be raised to this is, if you make someone stateless while they're in your country, where do you deport them to? Now, in actual fact, the way that we've seen deprivation of citizenship being used is it's almost always used when the individual is overseas, when they're out of the country. And in some cases, they've even waited until someone has left the country and then removed their citizenship, which is effectively changing the locks while someone's out of the country, making it impossible for them to return. So what the Home Secretary would effectively be doing in that case is removing someone's British citizenship, and then it's up to them. It becomes their problem. How they get around the issues. Stateless people are often treated in the same way as refugees. So that's the actual legal status that they often have. But where an individual is being accused or suspected of serious national security related grounds, which are the grounds on which people generally lose their citizenship, it's hard to see how they would be able to effectively claim asylum in another country. I mean, these people would be pariahs. Where a lot of individuals have found themselves when they've lost their citizenship is in parts of the world like Afghanistan, like Somalia, the rougher bits of Pakistan and so on, where actually the writ of law is very weak. So that's one of the ways that one of the places that people have found themselves in those lands where your immigration status is really the least of your worries.
But that's a sort of self-fulfilling prophecy, isn't it? It sort of gives them no option but to go and hang out in those areas of the world where people are suspecting that they might be up to no good.
What we have seen is that in a lot of these cases, people have already been in these parts of the world, and that's part of the reason that these orders have been used against them.
And what kind of reaction have you had to your story among, I don't know, the public or sort of rights organisations, this kind of thing?
Well, a lot of people feel that it is, that the Home Secretary is acting to protect Britons from fundamentalists and from extremists. But there is also a huge amount of concern at the human rights implications of using these orders. We have seen, human rights groups raising concerns that these are sort of arbitrary and secretive powers, that the Home Secretary can act with very little notice and effectively exile someone. And one human rights lawyer compared it actually to medieval exile, and she said it's just as arbitrary and just as cruel. And that really raises concern. I mean, in the United States, the Supreme Court has ruled that it is actually illegal for the United States government to remove someone's citizenship, because they've said that citizenship should not be a fleeting state or anything which can be taken away by the government. Well, actually, the British government is currently taking a very different view of that. The British government is saying, actually, your citizenship is effectively contingent on good behaviour.